In this video, we are going to answer questions that were asked us by a number of European citizens. And so one of them is, why on earth is the EU so slow? I would say, well, it's because the EU always is ahead of society. For 40 years, we have been in a society where the common belief was that faster is better. Actually, the EU understood that actually there's qualities in being slow. You remember the slow food movement, but also the fact that, well, driving more slowly avoids death on the street, and thinking more before you take a decision, well, actually may lead to better decisions. More seriously, consensus building, compromise building, which is at the heart of democracy, takes time. And even more so when we work in 24 different languages, when we work with people whose historical experience is quite different. Well, the advantage of Europe is unity in diversity. The diversity aspect helps us looking at problems from different perspectives. And it's clear that there's not just differences between various parties, but also from different areas of Europe where the historical experience is different. And the fact that you look at a problem from different perspectives takes time, because you need to build the consensus, but on the other hand, you may have a better chance to find a lasting solution. You might think, and that is very much the French model, that an enlightened leader will take the right decision very fast. But the risk is that the next enlightened leader will do the exact opposite. And if you want lasting solutions, well, it takes time to build them. Look at the cathedrals. It took centuries to build them, but almost a millennium later, they still stand. And that is what we want to do when it comes to deciding policies for the Europeans.
We need the European Union in order to address the big problems that we're facing today. That is, for example, the pandemic, because we're all facing the same problem, we're all facing the same pandemic, and there we need to work together in order to overcome that big challenge. Also, the climate crisis is something where everyone, of course, needs to do their share, but we can only be effective if we're working together at the European level and, of course, at the global level. But for that, we need the European Union to be a front runner in climate action. And as Greens, we're pushing for that. And also when it comes to foreign policy, it's very important that we stick together as European Union, because one member state alone has a weak voice in the world, but altogether we can have a strong voice for human rights, for climate justice, and so on and so forth. But of course, for that, we also need to make sure that we know what we're defending, who we are, which values we want to represent also in the outside world, and what values we want to base ourselves on. And for that, we need stricter action on the rule of law problem that we have right now, when some member states are leaving the path of rule of law, of good governance, and that is a big problem that needs to be addressed, because else we will only end up weaker as European Union altogether.
Europe is built on solidarity. For the future of Europe, I wish that we do no longer talk about Western Europe or Eastern Europe, but Southern Europe or Northern Europe, but we talk about the European Union.
For the future of the EU, I wish for a just transition to a green economy where people can live their lives and work without harming our climate.
I wish for social justice, environmental protection, and citizens' engagement.
I wish for Europe showing the leadership in climate protection and solidarity.
I wish for all the countries to be based on democratic principles. This very thing is being tested in Poland right now. This has led us to realize how easily it can be taken away.
For the Day of Europe, I wish a common response to the COVID crisis, and particularly a common response to the economic crisis that we will face.
I wish that we start a democratic renaissance, a process of reform bringing together the energy of the youth and citizen movement that mobilize on climate, those who work on a new social pact, those who build a new green economy, those who defend their democratic right to converge for the fight of a greener and democratic Europe.
Ich wünsche mir für die Zukunft der Europäischen Union, dass die Interessen der europäischen Bürgerinnen und Bürger in Zukunft nicht mehr hauptsächlich durch die nationalstaatlichen Regierungen in die europäischen Entscheidungsprozesse eingespeist werden, sondern mehr durch starke europäische demokratische Institutionen.
Let's continue what Schuman started and build a stronger, more united Europe, a European Federal Republic.
How can we advance a more federal and more democratic Europe? I think our first and best chance is the conference on the future of Europe that is just about to start on the 9th of May. It will allow anyone really to submit their proposals for a better, a stronger Europe. And this conference will then debate those ideas and hopefully come with very ambitious proposals. So what are some of the issues that should be discussed to make Europe more democratic and federal in this conference? Well, I think obviously we need to discuss European elections and how they work. For us, these elections should be way more European. We should have truly European parties running on a common platform. Citizens should be able to elect those that take the top positions at the top of the Commission and the other institutions in those European elections. And we think for that, we need European election lists. We also need to discuss on how the institutions work together. For example, the European Parliament should have a right to initiate legislation. The European Council needs to be reformed. Too often, unanimity voting in the Council is still blocking us from taking a joint position on issues like taxation, on social issues, but also on foreign policy, for example. So that needs to change. The Council also needs to be more transparent, of course. And indeed, on transparency, we can do much more. Special interests should not be able to influence the decisions or the legislation made by the EU institutions. And I think for that, what we need is independent control. We need an independent body to check that the rules on revolving doors, on lobby transparency, on conflicts of interest are respected. So that's also something that we Greens are fighting for, an independent EU ethics body.
After 15 years working as EU Commissioner for Industry and Cars, Mr. Höfinger leaves his post today. He is immediately starting a new job at the German car lobbying organization Autowerke. Critics say he will exploit his insider knowledge and contacts to help Autowerke fight against new EU climate laws, which were implemented this
year. Hey, John. I'm leaving now.
Ah, all right. Well, we'll be seeing each other very soon anyway.
Don't sell your insider knowledge, and don't lobby your former colleagues. We want your new job to be free of conflicts of interest. Don't let the revolving door spin out of control. It is time for an EU ethics body.
It's quite normal that you can only vote for the MEPs or like the representatives of your constituency. But we want EU reform, such that you can also vote for European parties and give a direction to European politics. In Italy, you can also vote for Volt, because we are a pan-European party.
Why are the biggest parties and countries the ones who rule and not regions or cities? Well, the European Union is still too much based on the power of its member states. They retain a big influence on EU decisions and institutions, mainly the Council, but not only, especially the bigger ones. But I believe the European Union is much more than 27 member states. We should reinforce the federal level while at the same time empowering regions and cities and giving them a bigger role. And we also need to take into account those peoples in Europe wishing to democratically change the status of their own countries while at the same time remaining part of the Union. The governance of the European Union has to be much closer to its own diversity. This would further legitimize our common project.
LGBTI rights should definitely be protected in the European Union. That is why we declared the European Union an LGBTIQ freedom zone. And this is also why we are standing up against attacks on LGBTI rights in, for example, Poland and Hungary. We want to go beyond what we have at the moment, and this is why we also strongly supported the LGBTIQ equality strategy by the European Commission, where certain things are foreseen that would strengthen the rights of the LGBTI community inside of the European Union, like, for example, the mutual recognition of documents like birth certificates or marriage certificates. We want LGBTI people to be fully protected from violence and discrimination in the European Union. We want them to enjoy full rights as EU citizens, and this is why we are going to continue to fight for LGBTI rights in the European Union and beyond. But I think it is also important to say that this topic of LGBTI rights is very closely linked with issues of rule of law, fundamental rights, and democracy inside of the European Union. We see an authoritarian wave rolling over Europe at the moment, and this is why it's even more important that as Europeans we stand up together also for minority rights, for fundamental rights for all, and for democracy and rule of law.
You call us lunatics. You call us an irrelevant minority. You call us perverts when all we ask for is equality. You tell people we are a threat. You deny us the right to be who we want to be when all we ask for is freedom.
Strefa wolności dla osób LGBT+ to ważny sygnał, ale to dopiero początek. Równość małżeńska, prawo do wychowania dzieci, ochrona przed mową i przestępstwami z nienawiści, prawo do decydowania o swojej tożsamości płciowej to muszą być prawa Unii Europejskiej. To prawa każdej Europejki i każdego Europejczyka.
Vi måste också se till att vi stoppar all utbetalning av medel till medlemsstater som inte lever upp till EU:s grundläggande värderingar.
Education is a key to prevention from gender-based violence because the root causes of that violence are gender stereotypes and patriarchy. Gender-based violence has a structural nature and it is one of the main social mechanisms that disadvantage women in the family and in the society. Women and non-binary people experience it just because of their gender. Consequently, to effectively prevent it, we must fight the gender stereotypes through education of children, but also of adults who did not get that education when they were young. I think that everyone can and everyone should be educated that gender-based violence is a widespread violation of fundamental human rights.
Nasza pani wychowawczyni przyszła dziś do szkoły i miała złamaną rękę. Jak się jej zapytałam, co się stało, to się rozpłakała i poszła do domu. Potem pani psycholożka zrobiła nam lekcję o przemocy i powiedziała, że co trzecia kobieta będzie kiedyś ofiarą przemocy. I że to może być każda kobieta, taka co jest biedna albo taka co jest szefową firmy. Taka jest no, że tak właśnie jest. Ja chcę być szefową firmy, która robi fajne gry na telefon, ale nie chcę, żeby ktoś mnie bił. Pani powiedziała, że tylko politycy mogą zmienić tę statystykę, ale mój tata mówi, że politykom nie można ufać, bo jak coś jest trudne, to oni tego na pewno nie zrobią. Ja myślę, że jak jesteście politykami i to jest wasza praca, to musicie to zrobić, nawet jak to jest trudne. Jak będę szefową firmy i będę chciała zrobić fajną grę i ktoś mi powie, że to jest trudne, Ja powiem, no sorry, ale trzeba to zrobić. Wam też tak mówię. No sorry, ale trzeba nie pozwolić, żeby mężczyźni bili kobiety.
No sorry, ale w Polsce tego już nie załatwimy, bo rząd PiS odbiera kobietom kolejne prawa.
Czas na Unię Europejską. Wejdź na trzymamstronękobiet.pl i podpisz nasz list do Komisji Europejskiej.
In a world free from violence, I would go back home.
In a world without violence, I would post on social media whatever I want without being afraid of hateful comments or threats.
In a world free from violence, I would walk alone at night, not fearing for my life.
In a world free from violence, I would be finally 100% myself.
In a world free from violence, I would tell future generations that we live in a truly equal world.
In a world free from gender-based violence, I would go for a jog after sunset.
In a world free from violence, I would not be afraid to express my opinion without being verbally or physically threatened.
If I would live in a violence-free world, I would wear whatever I felt like.
In a world free of violence, I would go for a run in the park after sunset.
In a world free from violence, I would breathe with ease.
The easy answer to this question is because it fills us with guilt and fills us with shame. So instead of translating those feelings into actions, many of us instead do nothing, which is wrong. Because we know that colonialism has built our society and is part of our history. And we know that racism is a fact and that it's ongoing and that we need to do something to be able to change this reality. And working with the EP resolution after the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, it was so obvious that many politicians felt it as their responsibility to point finger at the US, and it wasn't hard for them to condemn the structural racism and the police violence in the US. But on the part in the resolution where we also underline that structural racism and discrimination is a reality within the EU, it was harder for many. And I think that the way we can politicize this issue is by telling it how it is. I mean, we must do what we can, and this is a responsibility that we as politicians have. A few days after the killing of George Floyd, I was putting my youngest daughter to bed. She chatted away and then went silent and asked me, "Will they kill me too?" Colonialism has defined American and European societies for centuries. It has created deeply rooted prejudices and inequalities that still prevail and de facto kill people. Of course, structural racism in EU is different from the US. We don't have the same horrific history of slavery and lynching. But we do have documented atrocities in our colonial history which still resonates today through discrimination and police brutality. No one is free unless all are free. This Parliament and your Commission will define how the EU steps up to create a sustainable society that leaves no one behind. There can be no room for racism and discrimination. A first step would be to unblock
the anti-discrimination directive that has been stuck in Council since 2008. Madam President, I call on you and the incoming German presidency to take this historic opportunity for action. Tonight, I want to put my daughter to bed and assure her you will be safe, because in the EU, we refuse to be silenced by hate, by fear, by ignorance. I ask on the behalf of my daughter, if not now, when?
A few weeks ago, the European Commission presented us their idea of the European Disability Strategy. We, in the European Parliament, presented the Commission last year our ideas of a real and robust European Disability Strategy 2021 till 2030. The idea of a strategy from the Commission is, in my view, not strong enough. We need clear targets, clear guidelines if it comes to phasing out sheltered workshops, if it comes to the same status and labor rights for persons with disabilities. But from the labor market to other fields, we need free access to the transport EU-wide. Even there, it's a huge fight to push for it. We need a strong EU disability card, not only for leisures. So I would like to hear from the Commission how the European disability could look like. We have to support a social, inclusive labor market so that persons with disabilities have the same labor rights. Just to mention two or three of our demands, and we have to push the Commission and we have to push the Member States as well.
Real change will only come about if progressive leaders seize this moment an opportunity to more deliberately engage diverse stakeholders in the policy process. Policy making behind closed doors belongs to the past. Further democratization of the policy process, including by finding ways to engage a wide range of stakeholders at every stage of policy development, can positively transform our approaches to the key challenges of our day and achieve greater impact. Central to this approach should be the reminder that ethnic groups are not uniform. Policymakers should seek out innovative ways to engage constituents that draw a diversity of perspectives and facilitate nuanced approaches to challenges. Traditionally, policymakers have a responsibility to develop a policy system that looks like and reflects the people of Europe, but that's not enough. People from the visible minorities must also become more centrally engaged. If we are to expect legislative and policy outcomes that reflect the diversity of Europe, we must demand that the policy machinery includes Black people and people of other cultural backgrounds in a formal way through active engagement at each stage of the policy process. Policy institutions should critically examine their internal makeup and judge whether they reflect the diversity needed to advance the most effective policy positions. The most hotly debated and critical policy issues of the day, including migration, access to education, healthcare, and criminal justice, disproportionately affect people from the visible minorities. That alone speaks to the need and the benefit of recruiting a diverse staff that can develop and enact effective policies that respond to today's Europe. Pour ma part, en tant que femme noire en Europe, je n'ai pas seulement pris conscience de la réalité raciste chez nous, j'ai vécu la réalité raciste de l'Europe pendant les 40 dernières années. Ce qui se passe dans le monde aujourd'hui est le résultat de structures colonialistes d'oppression qui sont en place depuis des centaines d'années. Je veux que justice soit rendue pour tous ceux qui ont perdu leur vie, ceux qui ont perdu des proches et tous ceux qui ont été traumatisés par la police. Il ne s'agit pas seulement des Noirs européens, mais de tous les Noirs, de tous leurs descendants, les people of color, y compris ceux qui continuent à se noyer en Méditerranée en raison d'une politique d'immigration raciste. Je veux être clair. All Black Lives Matter. Qu'ils soient citoyens européens ou non. Black Trans Lives Matter. Black Women Lives Matter. Nos vies comptent. Et comme dit Martin Luther King, nous devons apprendre à vivre ensemble comme des frères. Sinon, nous allons tous mourir comme des idiots ensemble.
Honestly, there are two scenarios possible on how things can evolve about rule of law and democracy. The huge deterioration of rule of law can go on in Hungary and Poland, and we could see a total dismantlement of any democratic structure. We have already stepped out of a normal democracy in both member states. And in front of that, Commission and Council have not done anything. The Parliament has issued strong resolution, but it's not the executive body, and basically it is ignored by Commission and Council. So this future could be that European Union becomes an empty shell with some economic regulation, some social progress, but no more a common destiny for everyone. A citizen in Hungary would not have the same rights and freedom as a citizen in another member state. The other scenario is, of course, much more hopeful, and this is the one the Greens stand for. We must put pressure on the Commission to launch eventually infringement procedures. There are numerous reasons, attacks on liberties and democratic standards in these two member states that entirely justify infringement procedures. The French presidency, when it will be its turn, can start drafting recommendations, strong recommendations, and then we would have a statement of the Council stating exactly what is honestly happening today in Hungary and Poland, because at the moment we just have basically a denial of the Council of the situation. And then we could trigger the rule of law mechanism conditionality, which means that European funds would go directly to the beneficiaries, to non-governmental organizations, public local services, and not go to the corrupted government. And we would then prevent captation of power and of money from these governments. We could use all the tools that are at disposal in the existing treaties, in the frame of these treaties, and we could also hope for some changes of treaties that would give us even more powers to the Parliament, a council that is not blocked by unanimity, and also commissioners that act as ministers of all citizens and not only representatives of their own national interest. And then we would be in a healthy, mature European federal democracy.
Nipsa Batchak, 1956. 2016, newspaper bought by a friend of Viktor Orban, then shut down. Index.hu, 1995-2020, news website bought by a friend of Viktor Orban. Staff was fired or pushed to resign. They then created telex.hu. Club Radio, 1999-2021. Radio frequency was not given by the government this year. They went on internet. We could speak about Origo, the first newspaper bought by a friend of Viktor Orban in 2014, changed dramatically and radically its editorial line to become 100% pro-government without no nuances, like all the other medias, bought by friend of Viktor Orban these last years. The obituary of independent media in Hungary is getting longer every year. There are no arrests of journalists in that member state, but every means are being employed by the Fidesz government to suppress purely and simply media freedom and media pluralism. Forced closures, media capture, state aid abuse, channeling state advertising only to pro-government media, smear campaigns against journalists. And the creation of a media council which regulates everything is totally non-transparent and completely in the hand of the government. This is not rule of law concern. This is the core issue of the European Union. This is free market. This is distortion of the fair competition and misuse of European money. This is our job.
The attack on women's and LGBTI rights in Poland continues. We can see in action right now what happens when authoritarians and fundamentalists take political control of the judiciary. Not only rule of law is undermined, but also fundamental rights are under heavy attack. And I can reassure you, we are going to continue to stand up across groups in the European Parliament to defend fundamental rights, to defend women's rights, and to defend LGBTI rights.
Nie dyskutujemy tu dziś o wyroku niezależnego sądu, ale o decyzji politycznej. Została podjęta przez osoby nieuprawnione do orzekania, zasiadające w Trybunale Konstytucyjnym zależnym od partii rządzącej. To nie orzeczenie, ale polityczny zamach na fundamentalne prawo kobiet do decydowania o sobie. Kolejny taki zamach w Polsce. W Polsce nie ma już praworządności i nie ma praw kobiet. Doszło do tego również przez to, że Komisja Europejska nie była skuteczna w egzekwowaniu przestrzegania zasady praworządności przez Polskę. Komisja Europejska nie była również skuteczna w dążeniu do przyjęcia horyzontalnej dyrektywy antydyskryminacyjnej gwarantującej wszystkim kobietom w Unii Europejskiej równe traktowanie w obszarze ochrony zdrowia, w tym w dostępie do aborcji. Bo aborcja to normalne świadczenie medyczne i tak powinna być postrzegana przez prawo. Kiedy Komisja podejmie w końcu działania i wykorzysta wszystkie swoje narzędzia, aby ochronić kobiety w Polsce? Czas się kończy. Dziękuję.
Yes, why do we not do more in fighting the climate crisis? It's a very important central question also for us Greens in the European Parliament. This is what we came here for in the climate election, the European election. It became clear the 2030s are the years in which we can still fight the climate crisis. They are completely crucial and we have to use them. Well, until now, we have a new climate law with new climate targets that are unfortunately not enough, but there's more coming up. Huge climate legislation. We Greens, we are fighting for a high price for CO2 emissions, above 150 euros. We are fighting for the end of coal. We are fighting for renewable energies, 100% renewable energies in all Europe. We are fighting for the end of the internal combustion engine of fossil cars, in order for us to use more trains, more bikes, e-cars, but also our feet. All of these things, they will be decided on the European level in the coming years. But we need citizens, we need everyone to be on board, to create momentum and dynamic. If it's there, we can win. So we will be doing whatever we can with our hearts and our minds and our soul to still stop the climate crisis. But it can only work if we do it together.
The climate crisis is real. But we know what we should do. We need to be ambitious. We are determined to save our planet. That is why Greens succeeded in getting an ambitious 60% carbon emissions cut by 2030, no public money for fossil fuels by 2025, a carbon budget for Europe, a new climate council with independent scientists. The European climate law will lay the foundation for climate protection in Europe. We did it. We voted for climate. Now the decision must be made by the leaders of 27 EU countries. They must act now to save the planet. Tell your politicians to vote for climate.
Good question. Will the Commission withdraw the cap? I think if they want to save the Green Deal, they will have to withdraw the cap. And in fact, the cap as it is negotiated now, it will not deliver to small farmers, so it will still spread EU taxpayers' money to the big oligarchs. It is not using all the chances that we have to sequester CO2, to change our agricultural model towards a green and more healthy food production. So I guess it will depend on how much mobilization we will have across the European Union. If there's thousands and thousands of citizens demanding to withdraw the cap, maybe Ursula von der Leyen realizes that she needs to do that to save her Green Deal and to follow public opinion. We have to fight for it, but unfortunately, I think at the end of the day, they will be not brave enough and shy away to withdraw the cap. We will have to go with what we get. Why they are not legally eligible for transport and why actually veterinarians should not sign off their transport paper.
Kälber dürfen nun maximal 19 Stunden transportiert werden. Es ist nicht möglich, Milch zu erwärmen und 250 Kälber entsprechend zu versorgen am LKW. Das geht nicht. Meines Erachtens sollten Kälber erst mit 5 Wochen transportiert werden dürfen und nur dann, wenn sie sicher abgesetzt sind.
When will animal welfare be substantially addressed, considering its interconnectedness? Everything is indeed interconnected, especially when it comes to animal welfare topics. Animals are sentient beings. This is written in the Article 30 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. Nevertheless, animals are very often treated like machines and exploited. Throughout Europe, they are held, millions of animals are held in very small cages, which is completely cruel and unnecessary. Also regarding the legislation on national and EU level, very often this legislation is too lax or outdated. Coming back to the interconnection, when we speak about the concept of One Health, the way we treat animals, for example in the industrial farming by giving them a lot of doses of antibiotics, this has also repercussion on the health of human beings.
as they are developing an antimicrobial resistance, and infections are then going to be very hard to be treated. But the COVID-19 has also been a wake-up call. A lot of people want to change now in the way we treat our environment and the way we treat animals. And therefore, the Commission has also proposed, and this is some positive news, has proposed a revision of the animal welfare legislation until 2023. So this is a unique opportunity to make animal welfare not just nice to have, but a crucial element for a healthy and human society.
Les crimes contre l'humanité en Chine, les camps de concentration, le travail forcé, les stérilisations de force, ce que certains appellent aujourd'hui un génocide contre les minorités, notamment ouïghours, et puis la répression des manifestations pro-démocratie à Hong Kong, jamais la dictature en Chine n'a été aussi violente. Comment accepter dès lors que l'Union européenne s'engage dans la ratification d'un nouvel accord commercial, un nouvel accord d'investissement? Les sanctions contre les dirigeants chinois et les embargos contre toutes les entreprises du Xinjiang ne suffisent pas. À cela, le régime chinois répond par de nouvelles sanctions, par la volonté de réprimer aussi la liberté d'expression en dehors de Chine, comme par exemple contre nos collègues du Parlement européen. On ne peut pas en parallèle continuer à faire des affaires au détriment des droits humains, comme si toutes les valeurs de l'Union européenne disparaissaient face au business et aux investissements chinois dans l'économie européenne. C'est d'ailleurs aussi un enjeu de souveraineté économique, donc de souveraineté démocratique de l'Union européenne. Au nom des valeurs de l'Europe et de la lutte contre les génocides, au nom des libertés fondamentales et de la démocratie, les négociations avec la Chine doivent être immédiatement suspendues tant que les violations des droits de l'homme et l'absolue violence perdureront au Xinjiang, comme dans les autres régions où les minorités sont maltraitées, réprimées, torturées. Signer cet accord, c'est affaiblir la souveraineté européenne en se rendant plus dépendant encore d'un partenaire commercial autoritaire. Signer cet accord, c'est feindre d'ignorer les violences insoutenables contre les minorités. Arrêtons toute négociation avec la Chine dès à présent.
Yeah, this is in fact a very good question. For years, for decades, the EU trade policy followed a dogma of more free trade, more liberalization, more deregulation is good and is the only goal. When we had the big protests against TTIP, against CETA, many citizens in the European Union woke up and understood that trade policy is a very powerful tool that can shape our environment, that shapes our economy here in the European Union. And I think this mobilization of citizens, of all of you, really helped us here in the European Parliament to fight for a better trade policy, because we see the disastrous effects of bad trade agreements. If we look at the Mercosur agreement that will fuel the deforestation in the Amazon region, we have to say that has to stop. And citizens, like all of you, who help us to fight for a better trade policy are really, really important. We have done a lot of steps. Now the European Commission officially recognizes that we need to anchor the Paris climate agreements and also the Green Deal in our trade agreements. There is an acknowledgement that we need environmental and social standards, human rights standards in the trade agreements that are really, really enforceable. So there is movements happening at the moment. It is still a hard fight, but we Greens in the European Parliament are fighting this fight with the help by all of you.
Today, climate defenders are here with us in front of the European Parliament to say no to the EU-Mercosur agreement and any additional protocol because non-compliant with our social, environmental, human rights standards.
The climate movement is against the Mercosur trade agreement because it will fuel the deforestation in the Amazon region.
This agreement is not only accelerating climate change and deforestation, but it also increases exports of live animals and animal products which are not conform to the animal welfare standards.
We, the Greens, we are the voice of the civil society here in the European Parliament because we are fighting this dangerous trade agreement.
We will be their voice.
How can the European Union, on one hand, promote peace and on the other sell arms to conflict areas? Well, that's a good question, and the answer is quite simple, it shouldn't. Most of the arms that European member states export actually go to the Middle East. And this is a region that is ravaged by conflict, by crisis, and so many civilians are dying, also from weapons made in the European Union. And if you ever needed one example to show that more weapons do not make a region more secure, it's the Middle East. And that's why the European Union has given itself rules, the so-called common position, that all member states sign, that clearly says weapons made in the European Union should not go to war and crisis regions. But we see that many member states still continue to do such exports. And I think now it's really time that in the European Union, we work together to make sure that there is transparency, so we actually know which weapons are being exported where, and we can have a proper debate. To make sure that we have political control over these exports, which we do not always have, and especially to make sure that we have the same rules and regulations and decision-making and a very strict enforcement in all European member states with a joint European mechanism.
Arms from the European Union are still exported to crisis regions and war zones around the globe. Civil society rightfully protests about this, because there is a common position of member states from 2008 not to do so. Yet, the reality is different. Let's take the Eurofighter. It was exported by the UK and used by Saudi Arabia in the war in Yemen. Several EU countries co-produced the Eurofighter and other weapon systems. The problem is, arms export policies of EU countries differ significantly. So, if one country has an export ban, like Germany, export of these products still remains possible from other countries. Wouldn't it be better if the EU would actually decide for all member states based on very strict criteria? Well, that is what I want the Commission to work on.
Nuestro único dilema es si les acogemos bien o les acogemos mal, pero acogerlos es un imperativo que no depende de nosotros. Y desde luego, nosotros estamos por hacerlo bien.
I wish to say that I am daily in contact with the people in the Sea Watch, just to say my solidarity and to say that we welcome everybody.
been a ticking time bomb for a very long time.
This is the utter devastation on the Greek island of Lesbos.
Ein Großbrand hat das größte europäische Flüchtlingslager Moria.
Die Situation hat sich noch verschärft seit dem Covid-19-Ausbruch in Moria und seit dem Brand. Es ist jetzt die Zeit zu handeln.
Here you are, in this camp. It was supposed to be temporary, but you can't leave. No one can leave. There is nothing here. No jobs, no schools, no future. But staying home was really not an option. Sometimes, though, you wonder where it's safer, at home or here. The lives of millions of refugees have been put on hold. In the meantime, Europe makes dodgy deals with countries like Libya, Turkey and Afghanistan to keep refugees out, while ignoring its obligation to protect human rights. Tineke Streck is a member of the European Parliament for the Greens EFA. She stands for refugees' rights. Tineke investigates these migration deals and shows us that there are better solutions. We have a shared responsibility to offer refugees a perspective, to improve the circumstances in refugee camps, giving people proper shelter with access to education and work, and allowing the most vulnerable to safely and legally travel to Europe. That is what Tineke stands for. That is what we all stand for. We won't let them down. Join us.
We all know it. We need to make the transformation to a carbon-neutral society. As Greens, EFA, we have a clear vision and a solid plan. We want a just transition, a transformation of our economy in a way that is fair for everyone and leaves no one behind. A change that empowers local communities, that puts people before profit, and does not bail out the polluting industries of the past, but instead invests in industries with a future, in small and medium enterprises, in creating decent and sustainable jobs, and in social protections, so that individuals can find their place in the new economy, including the most vulnerable. A just transition is about access to public health and services, the possibility to retrain or upskill, access to lifelong learning, and social, affordable housing. It's about creating social inclusion and striving for a fairer society, as well as saving the climate. Not too much to ask, is it? Will you join us?
How can it be that still in 2021 we have 10,000s of people in Europe who are homeless? And why isn't the EU tackling this? Well, homelessness is an extreme form of poverty. And we see that social inequality keeps on rising in the EU. And besides that, we see that, for example, in EU recommendations, housing is seen as a market and an asset to make profit with, rather than a human right. But real-world experience is also showing us that if we want to end homelessness, we can. It is a choice. Look, for example, at Finland, where they have decided they want to end homelessness by the end of this decade, and their numbers are actually going down. I think the main issue we see with housing at the EU level is the free market mantra, that the free market will solve everything. And we also see this coming back when we're talking about housing. But with the housing crisis growing even stronger everywhere in Europe, with more people finding it hard to find an affordable house and more people becoming homeless, I don't think we can stand for that anymore. And we need to change the EU rules that, for example, hamper investment in affordable housing and to stop the EU from pushing housing corporations to push everything towards the market. And next to that, we need to make sure we set an EU goal to end homelessness. Because if we work together, share best practices, and decide that we will no longer breach the human rights to a roof over your head, we will make an important step towards eradicating homelessness all over the EU.
This report recognizes that access to decent and affordable housing is a fundamental right, a right that is guaranteed at EU level. From Paris to Warsaw, Dublin to Athens, an increasing number of people in the EU are struggling to afford the rising cost of housing. We can make sure houses are to live in. Rather than a fundamental right to be guaranteed for all, housing has increasingly been considered only as a market to make profits. This has a dramatic effect on prices. And not only the price, but also the quality of housing is a problem. Far too many people in Europe are living in overcrowded, damp, poorly insulated or otherwise unhealthy homes. And this is the housing crisis for those that actually have a home. Because the sad reality still is that more than 700,000 people sleep rough every night in Europe. And this number keeps on rising year after year in the last decade. We can solve the housing crisis if we want to. We can end homelessness by 2030. And the topic is high on the agenda of the Portuguese presidency. The Commission should be bold and dare to propose a social moonshot strategy, an EU-level goal together with all member states to end homelessness by 2030. We are living through a health crisis. We have an economic and social crisis unfolding. There is a climate emergency. We can tackle all these issues by investing in quality housing through the renovation wave. We know that housing renovation can create 2 million jobs. Thus, investment in renovation can help kickstart the economy. Citizens across Europe are struggling and count on us to stand by their side. With an economic and social crisis unfolding, the European Parliament will send a strong signal that we are serious about a strong social Europe. Thank you very much.
Hey, are you looking for an affordable place to live, but you have difficulties in finding one? You are not the only one. All over Europe, there is a huge shortage of affordable housing, especially in cities. And what is available is too expensive. We spend more and more of our income on housing. People are stuck. Because of this, we see growing inequality within our society. This is a common problem in many European cities, such as Barcelona, Berlin, and Budapest. Why is this? Well, others believe that we should put our trust in the housing market. But due to a shortage of houses, landlords keep increasing rents. We believe affordable housing is a fundamental right for everyone. So if we want affordable housing accessible for everyone, we need to change the rules. Many of these rules come from the European Union. That's where we should start. Where is it going wrong? The rules for investment in social housing are too strict. Commercial investors have better legal protection than tenants. They buy up more houses to make big profits. Through Airbnb, houses are constantly rented out to tourists. And because of the current rules, cities are unable to tackle this, which leads to less houses in which people can actually live. We need political will to change this all over Europe. Together, we can tackle the housing crisis.